All right, guys. So once again, this is SJG. Thank you for tuning into this conversation with Herbert Seward. He is an HBCU bandsman, courtesy of Alabama State. He's a DC native from Chocolate City when it was actually Chocolate City, and he also writes about HBCU bands and HBCU sports, particularly basketball, for HBCU Digital and some other outlets as well. So wanted to welcome, just remind you guys that's who we're talking to. And now we want to talk a little bit of hoops because I said I got a chance to actually meet him in person. And that was last week at the CIAA tournament in Baltimore, where, 5 great days of basketball took place. And at the end, 2 teams arose as champions. Elizabeth City State for the women's basketball program, their first ever championship. And the school out of Winston-Salem State University, they picked up their 13th CIAA championship. Both teams picked up automatic bids to the NCAA Division II tournament. Those will be announced a little bit later. But Herb, wanted to bring you in. I know, you have a long, just from talking to you, you have a long ties to some of the Virginia schools in CIAA and seeing them play and things like that. But what are your thoughts just overall about the CIAA tournament in Baltimore? I know it's not too far up the road from you, so
Yeah, it was.
what I used to get where I used to just be able to roll up to it easily. Now I got to plan out a couple days or weeks ahead, with usually
Yeah,
days.
yeah, dude. It was dope being able to just hop in my car from the DC metro area and drive up to Baltimore. Um, I think the first thing that comes to mind as it relates to my experience at this year's CIAA tournament is the fact that the city of Baltimore has really, 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 really embraced this event, and it speaks volumes to um, how great of a decision it was for CIAA leadership to move this tournament from Charlotte to Baltimore. Um, you've got a basketball hungry city that loves basketball. That this is the second year in a row that they've really turned out for the tournament, and it speaks volumes. It speaks volumes to the footprint that the CIAA is making here, um, and it speaks volumes to the potential the tournament can be being in Baltimore. Um, as far as the basketball goes, I think this is one of the more competitive tournaments I've seen in a good minute. Um, Lincoln's run to the final. I mean, what can you say? Um, and we saw this in spaces where Lincoln's coach, kind of came up in some of the spaces during the season when we weren't really checking for him like that. He was like, "Look, you need to look out for my squad."
Right, right.
And lo and behold, we get the tournament time. The those guards that they got, were really, really, really scoring at a high clip. Um, the way they played offense during that series of games in terms of spreading everybody out, allowing those guards to go to work and get to the hoop, really spoke volumes. Um,
I got to, I got a chance to talk to Coach Armstrong back in November because actually we hosted the first ever. They hosted the first ever, or the inaugural HBCU Game Day Classic up in Lincoln. So I got a chance to go see them. It was a great mix. It was Lincoln was the only CIAA school, but they were all HBCUs. Cheney, of course, the other school in Pennsylvania as a HBCU. Both of them claim to be the first. I'll let them continue to debate that in the comments below. And then also 2 schools that were not currently in HBCU leagues as well, but also UDC right down the road from you. And then also Bluefield State University, who, I've been saying for a couple of years, has been knocking on the door to get into the CIAA. And it finally became a member. Broke that news a couple weeks back as well. So they're going to be becoming a member soon, which is big because they bring football and they allowed us to let Shawan go on to the great beyond, to the
poor,
greener
poor,
pastures.
poor
So
boy. I gotta tell you. Yeah, I think EDC, in particular, man. I think EDC would. I mean, it's way. In my opinion, I think it's way overdue for those guys to really explore membership in the CIAA. from a basketball perspective, they have a pedigree that goes right, that falls in line with, um, a lot of the other programs, really successful programs in the league. They have a national championship under their belt, 1980, 81, 82, I believe.
Hmm.
Earl Jones, Michael Britt on that national championship squad. Um, yeah, I think that's something that would really be, um, it would really be prudent for the CIAA to really stay after going after, getting those guys in the door.
Yeah,
Um,
I think the two obstacles with that is obviously they don't have football. And in recent years, now there used to be a long-standing buy rule, which was really actually created to keep Maryland Eastern Shore from coming back to the CIAA back in the early '80s. A little bit of history for you, and actually UDC right around that same time period actually was accepted provisionally into the CIAA, but they never played, never participated as a team. I did some research earlier this year and found that out. But not having football is an issue because, of course, now we have Claflin, who does not have football as well. But adding Bluefield State gives you a 13th overall member, which keeps you at 12 for football, though. So, but now it becomes splitting that pie that is the CIAA tournament, because the CIAA tournament is the biggest money. There aren't any there's six-figure money games in D2 football, right? Or in
right.
D2 sports. And even if you play a Carolina in basketball, I think WSSU was able to get 25,000 or 20,000, which is a little more than they usually pay. So I think it's going to be, and I think there's even the thing with Bluefield was splitting, figuring out how to continue to increase the pie for the current member schools. But yeah, I think UDC, depending on some sports that they have, and I know the CIAA. Are they ever going to think about picking baseball? There's a lot of discussions that we could go with there, but yeah. So all of that to say, Lincoln's Coach Armstrong, who's an interim coach, he told me back in November, he was like, if we're a team, it's gonna be some frustrations in November and December. You're gonna like us in January, you're gonna love us in February. And true to form, even before they got to the tournament, they knocked off the big bad wolf, the Detroit Pistons of the CIAA, Virginia
Virginia
Union.
Union.
So
That's hilarious.
there's that, which we'll get to that discussion a little bit later. But yeah,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So Lincoln definitely incredible run to the championship, their first ever. And you think about it, they're a founding member of the conference, along with Howard, Hampton, Shaw, Virginia Union. Um, and so they left. They played in the first tournament back in DC at Turner's Arena, I think it was called, at Turner's Field. But they left in the 60s. And so they were about 45 years out of the CIAA. So good for them to come back and get to the championship game.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, their run notwithstanding, I think Winston-Salem um, was head and shoulders one of was the standout of the tournament, in my opinion. Um, just the way they played defense throughout the entire tournament, their length really gave people problems. Um, their ability to really go inside and to be, um, and to be efficient, when they needed to be. Because some of those games, the quarterfinal and the semifinal games were real grinds
Mm-hmm.
where, it was a struggle to score points. But, the energy that, Smudge Teal and uh, what's Jalen's last name? I forgot Jalen's last
Well, there's three Jalen's, right? And they all spell their
name.
name differently. So there's Jalen
Uh,
Parker. He's number 25. He's the guard that's a backup, and he's been a key player. There's Jalen Gibson, who's the NC State transfer, number
yeah,
22, big guy. And then there's Jalen Austin, who was the
he's an MVP. Yeah,
MVP. And so yeah, they got a three Jalen lineup, which I don't know if there's anybody else in college basketball that has a three Jalen lineup, but yeah.
I'd be hard pressed to find anybody in HBCU or regular or mainstream college basketball with three Jalen's in the lineup. But I think, like I said, the way they play defense during the tournament, their ability to really shut people down, um, it was the difference. Um, I know, the second half of that championship game, Lincoln, spread them out a little bit, and they were able to really do what they've been able to do guard wise during the tournament, which is, really get the spots on the floor, and get to the basket. Um, and I think that was the only time during the tournament where Winston-Salem really allowed that to happen was in the second half of that championship game.
Yeah, man,
Um,
I knew that was coming. I think so. John Dell, who's the beat writer for the Winston-Salem Journal, has been around WSSU basketball for over 26 years now. He said at the start of the season that this is the most talented team that he's ever seen, and of course they've had, even in that time they've had some NCAA runs, and this is the I think this is the fifth championship since then. But yeah, they have a very talented team. Again, Jalen Gibson, he's a D1 transfer from NC State. Jalen Austin, a D1 transfer for Gardner Webb. Jonathan Hicklin, a D1 transfer from I can't remember which school it is right now. Also, I think a guy who made a big difference for them was number 2, Nate. Big number 2, Nate Springs, who started his career at Kennesaw State. I really thought in that Virginia Union game he was a difference because Virginia Union is a team that had, a nationally ranked team, a very good team, and we're going to ride if they're not going to be in the NCAA tournament again with the
yeah,
23-7 record with what they've
agreed.
done. But they were kind of, that's why I call them, like, they were like the Detroit Pistons for Winston-Salem State, because they beat them 3 times. Winston only lost 3 games. I mean, 7 games all last year. 3 of them were to Virginia Union. They just were not a good matchup. You talk about the physicality. Their physicality and their inside out game really dominated those Winston-Salem. And you have to give Coach Hill credit for going out and getting Jalen Gibson, who was a 3-star recruit at NC State, and taking him. And he talked about how he had to build him up because he was used to, if he made a mistake at NC State, there was another 3 or 4-star guy there that was that, and they weren't going to be patient with him. But getting him there, getting Jalen Austin, who was on that 2020 team, and a big part of that, getting him back, added some toughness. And I think I said early in the year I was going to look forward to that matchup between him and Robert Osborne of Virginia Union, just because they're both guys that play a lot bigger than they are, very strong, very physical guys. And Union got that first game down in Winston-Salem. They ended I think it was a 20-game win streak that WSSU had. Very good game, happened on Celebration Bowl, so I wasn't able to see it. But in the last couple of minutes, Osborne kind of went off. And even on Friday's game, Osborne had 18. I think he was 6'4", but he had to work for it. And he made him work on both ends. And I think that was one of those little things that kind of helped them get over that hump for them. And I felt once they got past Virginia Union, I felt like that was where they kind of needed to be, even though they lost their key guard to an injury, Isaac Parsons, which is going to be
That's going to hurt
problematic for them. I think it's gonna hurt them in some ways, but I think also Samaj Teal, we saw him step up to the plate, where he's a guy who had D1 offers. He played with Justin Wright, who is now at North Carolina Central, and we'll talk about that he's doing some big things over there and leading their team. They played on the same team, and I could see that maybe Samaj was probably a little deferential to him, but I think Samaj is a better shooter than he is, and I think sometimes he can kind of lean on his other guys a little bit, kind of sit back a little bit. But when he had to take over, and of course hitting that shot against Virginia Union, I think his confidence grew, and that was an amazing shot.
that shot was clutch. It was definitely clutch. I think it's interesting that we're talking about Salem and Union and their prospects going forward for the tournament. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Uh, I think the CIAA has the possibility of getting at least 3 teams in. Obviously, Winston-Salem's already in with the auto bid. If Virginia Union doesn't get in this year, I don't know I don't know what the committee is smoking. I just don't. I think their body of work during the course of the season
Hmm.
um, should be more than enough to get them in and get them in at a seed that's not going to put them at a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean Claflin.
NCAA needs more respect basketball wise now. I think, especially last year, they didn't play during the COVID year when a lot of other leagues did the PSAC and all that stuff, and I think that put them behind a little bit. But even last year, them being left off was pretty. It was horrible, and I
Yeah,
think the thing with the CIAA is a lot of times they're playing early in the season and they play some really good, really tough teams, and they're still kind of gelling. If you look at West Virginia State, who's been nationally ranked, another HBCU, has been nationally ranked and things like that. They hosted a tournament where Shaw and Livingstone, who were middle of the road in their respective CIAA divisions, both of them fought them to 1 point games in their own building. UNC Pembroke is another example. They escaped with very slim margins over Shaw and Virginia State, who neither of them made it to the Final Four of the CIAA. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I think I saw a projection where Winston-Salem was predicted to finish eighth, and they lost those 3 key games down the stretch that probably really hurt them and put them in that position. So they would play an IUP, which they've already played once. I think it was a 17-point loss. They're the number 3 team in the country for anybody who's asking.
yeah.
And then
IUP is
were they what?
yeah, IUP is definitely legit.
Yeah, and then they've got Union playing Fairmont State at this point as a 4 seed, which means that if the Rams can do the tough job and probably beat the IUP at its own gym, then and if Virginia Union can beat Fairmont State, then the 2 teams will meet up in the second round, and only one HBCU would advance. So,
Yeah,
um,
that
you
that
know,
sound that sounds like par for the course with those guys.
yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, and this speaks to we kind of see this in football as well, on the D2 level in terms of how the perception of our leagues kind of gets skewed, and it's basketball wise, me personally, I don't the CIAA has been year in and year out one of the most competitive leagues in all of D2 basketball. Period. Um, it's a murderer's row, regardless of whether you're in the North or the South. Regardless of whether the traditional Southern powers are having an off year or not, or the Northern powers are having an off year or not. It's a slog. There are no gimme games. There are no cupcakes to be had. In CIAA play, and that's something that I think that I'm not sure what the NCAA is looking at when we talk about difficulty of leagues, league weight in terms of, when it comes to turning time. It's at the D2 level it's kind of mind boggling, and I think, to a lesser extent, you could say the same thing for the SIAC this year. Their tournament is still going on right now, but you've got at least between 4 and 6 teams in the SAIC that could very well be tournament teams. Whether we're talking about Tuskegee or Miles. Miles is normally, the standard bearer for the conference. But you got Lemoyne Owen playing extremely well. You've got I was watching Kentucky State, although they're kind of a dark horse. I watched Kentucky State yesterday when their make it to the quarterfinal. Um, there's a lot of good basketball being played at the D2 level in both of those conferences, and it's a. I just hope that people look at both the SIAC and the CIAA and understand that these leagues are a force to be reckoned with. Particularly CIAA. Um, you know, uh, the championship pedigree that the conference has kind of speaks for itself. Winston-Salem has a national championship. Virginia Union has multiple national championships.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a also ran conference. It's a conference that has historically had success, at the national level. And I hope that, I would hope that NCAA folks on these committees recognize that.
No doubt about it, man. No doubt about it. Something needs to be done about this. Even at the, we obviously see the D1 level where, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I think at the D2 level for sure, there are a lot of great teams that are not going to make the tournaments, and maybe one day, we'll have to work on a situation where we can get these guys under the guys who don't make it to the NCAA's on one roof and really just display something about the greatness of HBCU basketball, particularly at the D2 level where there's a lot of talent there. And then Herb, we will transition over quickly to the MEAC and the SWAC. We're in the final weeks of those. Talk a little bit about this. Talk a little bit to me about this Howard Norfolk State matchup. I got a chance to see Norfolk State the other day
Man,
against Central, and they got in that hole without their two best players and almost got out of it. Talk to me about that game, and then give me maybe your 5 players to watch for the MEAC and SWAC tournaments after that, and we'll let you go.
great, great. Simply put, that Howard Norfolk State game tomorrow night, which a brother is seriously thinking about taking off and attending. It's for all the marbles. It's huge. Um, Both Howard and Norfolk have been able to kind of right the ship a little bit going down the stretch. Um, and essentially, if Howard wins out, they're guaranteed at least a share of the conference regular season title. If they lose, then we have to really just factor in all sorts of math to figure out who's going to be what in terms of the regular season champ. Whether it's going to be a 3-way split, 2-way split. North Carolina Central's kind of gotten into the mix with their late surge. Um, I think for this particular game, in general, a couple of things are going to have to really be um, are going to come to the forefront. One is whether or not Steve Settle's going to be able to play for Howard. He's been concussion protocol for the last 2 or 3 games. Him being on the floor changes the dynamic of that squad. He's 6'10", got guard skills. Um, he's decent offensively, but where he really makes his impact is what he can offer defensively. And with his length, being able to really be at the top of that pressure, at the top of the zone, and half court situations, and forcing people to work around his length. Um, I think rotation wise, Howard is extremely deep. Um, Norfolk lost at North Carolina Central earlier in the week. They were down, some key components. Joe Bryant, who's on everybody's short list for Player of the Year in the MEAC, wasn't playing. But it says a lot.
Dana Tate too,
Dana Tate,
the second
yeah,
leading scorer.
exactly. Yeah, Dana Tate wasn't there. But I think the encouraging thing for the Spartans is that even with those really glaring omissions from their lineup, um, the fact that they really pushed North Carolina Central, who's been playing extremely well the last couple of weeks, really to the wire, to OT. Without that, bodes well for them. It bodes well for them in this upcoming game, and it bodes well for them going into the MEAC tournament. And I think ultimately, we're going to see a MEAC tournament that is going to be one of the more competitive that I've ever seen in recent memory. Um, all the programs that are going to be involved in the tournament, even down to South Carolina State, I think who's at the bottom of the standings.
Right.
Those guys have been, pretty feisty the entire season. Eric Martin has been playing a good brand of basketball. Um, it's really going to be an interesting tournament in the sense that there are no gimmies. Everything's going to be really contested. And the the superstars are going to have to really shine in order for those teams to really advance. In terms of 5 players that we can see for the tournament, for MEAC, to look out for, I would have to say That's a good question. Obviously, Joe Bryant Jr., sticks out for me from Norfolk State. Whenever clutch time hits and you need a basket, Coach Jones has that ace in the hole where he can just give it to Joe Bryant, put it in his hands, and let him do his thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'd say for Howard, um, it's easy to say Elijah Hawkins because he's kind of the engine that makes them run. But I think the X factor for them is going to be Marcus Dockery.
Mm.
Um, Marcus Dockery, transfer from Maryland,
Mm-hmm.
kind of took half the season to find his footing. Once
Right.
MEAC play started, that dude's been lights out.
Right.
Um, he's an X factor offensively in the sense that you put him anywhere on the perimeter and you lose him. He's a 3-point bucket waiting to happen. He's a really accurate shooter, and he really changes the dynamic of how Howard plays offense when he's on the floor because they can actually take, Jordan Wood and some of those forward um, point forward assets that they have and
Mm-hmm.
really put them in the corners and let them stretch defenses out so Elijah Hawkins can kind of go to work.
Right.
Um, Jelani Williams, his backup at point,
Mm-hmm.
also a good X factor because a
Now, is
lot
this
of
one
times.
of your five? This is one of your five. We got two. We got two, three, four. How many we got from Howard? Herb, come on
No,
now. I'm just,
no, no, I'm not. No, it's definitely not a 5, man. But I'm just kind of pointing out. Um, for Howard, I had to make Dockery, that 5
mm-hmm.
representative. But I want to
Okay.
point out that there's some other players there too. Same with Norfolk. Um, North Carolina Central. I got to go with Brandon Medley Bacon the way he's playing right now. That dude is from a defensive standpoint, he's rounding into exactly what Coach Moten wanted him to be at the beginning of the season. Somebody that's the last line of defense, at the rim, defensively, and he's been doing that job. I know in the Howard game, him blocking 2 shots in quick succession in the last minute of that game, sealed the deal for them on the
Right.
road. Um, I think, you
Right.
know, them playing offense through him and working out has given, Justin Wright and Chris Monroe and those scores they got on the perimeter. Even Fred Cleveland, who was an A&T guy, he went off the last game.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's making them very dangerous. The fact that they're able to start playing through him, is good news for them. Um, 4, I would have to say, hmm, I would have to say Deshaun Phillip, Maryland Eastern Shore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's been up and down during the
Mm-hmm.
last part of this conference slate, but he's one of the few guys on Eastern's roster that can really just go get his
Right.
whenever whenever you put the ball in his hands. And I think even though Eastern's is kind of slumping a little bit going into the home stretch, the way they play defense, um, allows for a guy like that to really take over games
Mm-hmm.
because you don't need much when you're holding people down and grinding them out, to have that, spark of scoring to really put you over the top. So I think he's going to be somebody that's going to be really hard to contend with in a tourney situation. Um, the 5th person, I would probably have to say, that's a good question. This is going to be hard because I'm trying not to put two. I'm trying not to put 2 of the
Mm-hmm.
same people on the same squad. But
Go ahead, man. It's your list. Go ahead.
yeah, I'm gonna have to break that rule. I would have to say I'm definitely gonna have to say Elijah Hawkins.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I mean it's hard not to say it because you know Howard's success has been predicated on how he plays. He
Right.
plays well. He plays under control. Um, Howard's a hard out. He
Right.
makes really good decisions with the ball. And on top of that, he's one of the better scorers in the conference, too, at his size.
Right.
You disrupt him, you change the way Howard plays. And it's hard to really not, um, it's hard to really not, include him into that list because he's, I mean, I know folks really didn't really on checking for him as an MVP, but he's as much an MVP as Joe Bryant is, and as some of these other cats are, because he's integral to what Howard does on the floor. So, for the MEAC and going into the tournament, those are the five that I got that I can think of right off the top of my head. In terms of the SWAC, that's a good question. Um, I can't look at Grambling and pick just one person, because their components fit together so well in terms of how they play. So I would have to go with Grambling's front line, their front line. Anybody that's seen Grambling play this year knows that they have a lot of energy on the glass. They're one of the better rebounding teams in the conference. And their size and length on the block really, really affects people. We saw that during the Pac-12 Challenge when I believe they played Washington State, and they enveloped those guys. Those guys they really couldn't generate any type of inside offense to speak of against them. And it's been kind of the same way in SWAC play. I think, I think the way they play, they get enough guard play from, Samaj Christian and some of those other folks on the perimeter, they're going to be a hard out.
We got next. Who's behind those guys?
Breon Whitley, Southern University.
Right.
I think in terms of scoring, he's one of the better scorers in the conference. And I think you get him in the good spots in the floor, he's going to put it in the basket. I think the big thing with Southern the last couple of weeks is that they haven't really had the ball in his hands, enough. They've kind of gotten away from attacking the rim and getting to the lane and scoring to allow him to kind of do his thing. Third guy, I would have to say Sean Doss Jr. UAPB. UAPB hasn't really gotten a lot of attention this year, simply because they've been kind of up and down. But that dude has been consistent. He's scoring almost 20 points, a game. And for year in year out, he's been one of the more consistent scorers in this conference. I think it's going to be interesting to see whether or not he can sustain it. And I think it's also going to be very interesting to see whether or not he gets help, because there's a lot of potential on that roster, but it doesn't show up all the time. And if he does get scoring help, if he does get a third, second or third option to really work with him consistently during the tournament, they could be a dark horse in terms of making a run. I would say the next guy on the list would probably be PJ Henry, point guard for Southern.
Right.
Again, when he wasn't on the floor, they're a different team. I think, Texas Southern making the run that they have has a lot to do with him being back. And people look at Texas Southern this year, half the conference, they've been kind of really below the 500 line of the conference in terms of winning. And now the late surge has got them back in a familiar position in the tournament where they can make a tournament run. Like I said, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. I think there's a lot of potential there for him to do so. To really have an impact on how they go about doing it. Last, that's a good question. I'm gonna put a head coach here.
Okay, go for it.
That head coach is Landon Bussey, Alcorn State. I think what he's done with Alcorn to be in contention to finish in the regular season title is nothing short of miraculous. You look at what Alcorn has on that roster. um, in terms of how they've been winning games, in terms of how they won close games. Um, and we saw the same thing out of Atlanta Bussy last year too.
Mhm.
Dude is a hell of a coach, and I think once we get into the tournament, into a tournament scenario for him, you know, the adjustments that he makes, on both sides of the floor is going to really stand out. I think it's going to give Alcorn a really good shot going all the way and getting that automatic.
Good stuff there, Herb. Yeah, man. As always, I know you're on it. Make sure you let everybody know where they can follow you and your work. Again, the great work that you do.
Yeah, man. Well, first and foremost, I am a contributor for HBCU Digital Network. Um, I write about HBCU football and basketball for HBCU Digital, as well as HBCU sports culture, include the bands and pretty much everything else in between. I am also a podcast host. I run a tech podcast on HBCU Digital Network called the Black Techies Podcast. Shout out to Dave and the rest of the crew out there. Um, we tend to do that 2 times a month on HBCU Digital, as well as our own YouTube channel and other podcasts, wherever you can pick up podcasts at. As it relates to college basketball, I am a contributor for Fanside's Bustin' Brackets Network, um, covering specifically SWAC and MEAC basketball, as well as other independent and conference-affiliated HBCUs, namely North Carolina A&T and Hampton and Tennessee State. I can be found there at bustinbrackets.com. And my work can be found pretty much anywhere within the MEAC and the SWAC in terms of conferences that are represented on the platform. Um, Finally, I can also be found pretty much every Wednesday night and Friday night on Twitter. On Wednesday night, part of the HBCU Nightly panel of crews when we do our spaces for HBCU Nightly. Um, and on Fridays, I can be found doing and hosting HBCU Hoops Weekly, along with Coach Payne, who is an NAIA expert, and we
Mhm.
cover all things about HBCU hoops during those sessions. So, yeah, man, check us out. Check us out.
No doubt
Um,
about it. Well, Herb, I really appreciate you for hopping on with me today. This was kind of short notice, so I definitely appreciate you for being a part of the broadcast and and giving us and sharing us your thoughts on the band situation previously, as well as the CIAA and the MEAC and SWAC. I appreciate you so much for all of the work that you do. And yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime soon and see, maybe after tournament time to see what we come up with. So I appreciate you so much. And I appreciate everybody who's who's listening on our podcast or watching on our YouTube channel. Make sure you guys hit those notifications so that you don't miss any of the great content that we have coming out for you guys all year long. So appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in the next one.